The North Coast 500 is 516 miles of spellbinding scenery, inspired by the famous Route 66. The drive starts and ends at the very impressive Inverness Castle. The first 20 odd miles are quite bland as we skirt the south side of the Beauly Firth. After Muir of Ord, we join the Ullapool Road and soon arrive at Conton. The road starts rising through a narrow wood-covered pass alongside the Blackwater River. I wanted to stop here. I turned into the Rogie Falls car park when an info board indicates the many walks that lead from here. The undulating waymarked path meanders down through the birch trees alongside heather-covered crags to the Blackwater River below. You can hear the falls before you see them. From the viewpoint there's a narrow path leading over to a dramatic wooden deck bridge suspended high across the river here, giving excellent views of a series of small waterfalls tumbling down from Loch Garth in the valley above, which culminate in a 30-foot drop to the river below. The falls are not particularly high, but they're impressive just the same, possibly due to their atmospheric setting, which is probably enhanced by the dramatic Sugarley suspension bridge. The road heads north along Strathgarth, hemmed in to the west by the steep wooded crags. To the east is Loch Garth, the loch that feeds the Rogie Falls. We cross the Kyle line by a level crossing at Garth as it heads off west. From just beyond here we turn off west along Strathbran. For hundreds of years, Achnasheen was an important junction in this part of the Highlands. The drove roads from Kyle and Skye in the west, and from Gairloch and Poolew to the north, both used it. As we approach Chachnashellach, the glen narrows and the trees close in for a while. I wanted to stop here. This is a starting point for quite a few excellent hill walks in the area. My intention was to take the path along the riverbank to a nice wee waterfall about a mile further on. As I was walking along the track, I could hear the roaring of the stags from the heights above. Just ahead is a very impressive Four Hole, about 7 metres short of Munro status. At a small burn, a path leads down to the river. While I was there, I looked over to the northeast, to where a bank of low clouds seemed to appear from nowhere. I couldn't believe it. Even worse, it had started to rain. Not that heavy, but I was still disappointed. That curtailed my trip. I decided to head back up from the river, and I would try my luck elsewhere. The forecast was for full sun for the whole day. Who would be a weather forecaster in Scotland? We reached the west coast at the long straggling village of Lochcarron, stretching for almost 2 miles along the loch shore. From Lochcarron, the road bears right to climb onto the scenic pass that cuts across the peninsula on the next stage of our journey. As we reach the top of the pass, the impressive Applecross mountains soon start to appear. I have always liked this part of the road. As the road starts descending from the open moorland of the summit, it now gives way to a steep-sided glen. For the next few miles, the road doesn't seem to know what it is. 1 minute it is two-way, then, without warning, it becomes single-track again. As the road heads on towards Loch Kishorn, we reach the small settlement of Sanachin, with its award-winning seafood shack, the Kishorn Seafood Bar. Most people drive straight on, but there's a turn-off worth taking to the left. Achentread is an attractive curve of whitewashed cottages sitting in the shores of Loch Kishorn. I get out for a look around. I noticed a rainbow on the other side of the loch. This was the view that I came here to see, the Bealach, the mountain pass to the west coast of Applecross. On the far bank is a Kishorn fabrication yard. The Bealach na Bow is one of the most challenging and well-known roads in the Highlands. Bealach na Bow is Gaelic for the pass of the cattle. It was a traditional drover's road for centuries. The road started to climb away from the loch. The view of the mountains up ahead as the road sneaked up the pass was quite magnificent. There are more parking places on the Bealach than on other single-track roads, but there are still not enough, and at times you're not aware that there's anything approaching until it appears in front of you. After a series of bends, the road climbs steeply to a tight sweeping arc where it becomes two-way briefly, and at last the Corrie na Bow appears ahead. For centuries, the Bealach was the gateway to the west coast of the remote Applecross Peninsula. The only other alternative was by boat. A rough gravel track was created over the pass in 1822 by Mackenzie of Applecross, but it proved to be difficult to clear in the winter and was often closed for months on end. With the advent of the motor car, it was deemed necessary to provide year-round access to this remote community, and a road was built in 1950. It was still gravel at the top though, and 20 years later work was started on the coast road around the north of the peninsula. The pass looks very impressive from here. The first of the raised hairpins appeared up ahead. I was now heading into the sun as I approached the first hairpin bend, turning completely back on itself and rising steeply above. There was nothing coming, so I took a wide swing at the unbelievably steep bend, accelerating all the time. Another hairpin appeared ahead, to the north. The road curved sharply around another blind crag to the left. The second hairpin approached. It's time to pause for breath. We were now almost at the top, at the last final hairpin. Another wide sweep and the road straightened out in front of me. We were still climbing steeply. A car appeared ahead from behind a pair of motorcyclists, but it didn't matter. I was heading into the large lay-by ahead. I decided to get out and stretch my legs. I have to say that my climb up the Bealach was pretty uneventful. I was lucky. I made the ascent under optimum conditions. I had a clear run at all the hairpins, and my reversing was minimal. It was still an adventure though, and a memorable drive. The hairpin bends at the summit are probably the highlight of the climb, and I watched a group of cyclists starting off down the pass, bringing all the traffic on the way up to a complete halt. This hair-raising challenge is the nearest thing in Britain to the great mountain passes of the Alps, due to its steep, narrow gradients and its series of very tight hairpin bends, which switch back and forth on the way to the summit. This epic climb rises from sea level to over 2,000 feet in about 5 miles. It is breathtaking and demands your full concentration. The Bealach is not for nervous drivers. If you're not confident enough to be prepared to reverse down a narrow single-track road with a cliff face on one side and a precipitous drop on the other side, which is supporting the parking place that you need to reverse into, then this road is not for you. Applecross was still a remote community when I used to travel to my Grand's Croft in the Outer Hebrides. I used to travel in McBrain's mailboat from Malig to Stornoway. There were no car ferries on the route in these days, and I remember the boat stopping offshore in the early 60s, opposite the harbour at Milltown, where a large rowing boat would arrive alongside to take passengers, packages and mail from a hatch just above the waterline, then head back into Applecross. The road starts to descend more sharply now as we skirt one of the western buttresses, Craig Gorham. This is more like it. I was still surprised as to how quiet the road over the pass was on a wonderful sunny day such as this. It was certainly much busier the last time I used it. The road skirted the crag as it wound around to the left by a series of blind corners. The barriers appeared again by the side of the road as the drop to the right started to increase. After another blind bend, the gradient steepened again. Another blind bend appeared ahead. I remembered this part of the climb from a previous visit. The bend seemed never ending. The previous and only time I drove over the Bealach, I found the ascent from Applecross much more difficult than the ascent from Kishorn. The west coast of Applecross was just down below us now, and our journey over the Pass of the Cattle was coming to an end. I'd enjoyed my trip over the Bealach na Bó, and I made my way down to civilization again.